welcome to an Everyday Canines video. In this episode we're going to be looking at ways that your seesaw will go wrong in competition and you get either faulted or eliminated by it. One way you'll get faulted or eliminated is if your dog takes the seesaw incorrectly, which Sparrow just did, because she jumped up to it in the middle rather than, right girls, can you just settle down, rather than coming on the end. So the important thing to bear in mind with the seesaw, seriously, is that they have to go up it in a straight line, touching the bottom contact and the up contact. That is your basic fundamentals. Any variation upon that is going to earn you either a fault or elimination. So if they miss this contact, that's 5 faults. If they miss that contact, it's 5 faults. Now, what do we mean by missing that contact? As long as the dog has a foot, such as Sparrow, in the contact zone, they have not missed it. It only has to be 1 foot, not even 2. It could be any foot, it doesn't matter which of his hind or front. So only if your dog was to jump off the seesaw from this pink area, missing the contact completely, would they get a 5 fault. However, because of the nature of the seesaw, one of the things that is important as a safety factor is that to complete it correctly, it has to touch the ground before the dog leaves it. If you think about it, it actually makes sense, because in competition, if dogs could leave it at any point, firstly they could fly off it and that would be dangerous injury, but also they could leave it early and that would actually give them an advantage time-wise. So it's important that the seesaw is flush to the ground on the floor before the dog leaves it, whether you're doing whatever type of contact you do. If it is not, then it's 5 faults. In terms of elimination, there are a couple of ways you can be eliminated. It could be if your dog runs up and then left the seesaw early, or they jumped on the seesaw early and then left it. Now there's a slight grey area in that, supposing your dog went up and they came off early and they hadn't completed it correctly. So you're like, I haven't completed it correctly. That was obviously 5 faults, they didn't get anywhere near the contact. And you then think, well, should I redo it? Is that going to be an elimination or a fault? Now, I've spoken to judges, and in general, there's a bit of a vague grey area of what they would actually do. But in general, if your dog had gone across the pivot point before it jumped off, then you redid it, you'd be eliminated because they had completed the majority of the obstacle. If, however, the dog got on and then got off very early, it would be a fault rather than elimination. It's a bit of a grey area. To be honest with you, if your dog did not complete the seesaw correctly in competition, even if you said to yourself, well, it's only faults, I'll carry on, ideally you want to make sure that dog does complete the seesaw correctly, because you can't win out or anything on a faulted run. So why would you say to yourself, oh, I've got to keep going? I would say if your dog messed up, it could be a confidence issue, it could be an error in just they made a mistake, redo it. Eliminate yourself, redo it, especially with baby dogs, because it's more important to keep that consistency with the seesaw than to worry about, well, I will still get around and, with faults. We talked about earlier contact behaviour, and if your dog does stopped contact, I'm just going to put this back down, now the dog's right away. If your dog does stopped contacts, now you saw Swift does a down in an earlier video, that's a fairly, not only just an obvious contact, but it's also a very solid contact. It would be very hard for her to leave and then come back and do a down. She'd have to completely come off and then come round. But what can happen, excuse me, we don't dig under my seesaw. What can happen with dogs that do what we call a 2 on, 2 off? That means they have 2 back feet on the seesaw or any contact and 2 front feet on the ground. I don't have, because my dogs are so little, that is impossible for them to do near enough. They would be flicked. But on bigger dogs they do. So they are like this. Sometimes what happens is the dog is coming, they go so fast that they can't actually stop in time or perhaps in training they've gotten used to not stopping in time. They come off and they go, oops, my foot was meant to be on there. They put their foot back on. When they do this, that is, they've eliminated themselves. Pure and simple. Because they've completed the obstacle, then they went back on the obstacle. If you've completed an obstacle and you then go back on it, it's an elimination, unless you were meant to do that. But you wouldn't obviously do the same obstacle twice in a row. But sometimes you might do a jump twice or whatever. So that is another way, and that's why I never teach the dogs, if you come off, to reset yourself. I just wouldn't. I don't have stop contacts anyway, but if I am helping someone else, I don't encourage them to do that, because you get that issue all the time. Those are your main handling errors, main fault errors that can happen on the seesaw. Another factor would be if your dog got so far up, turned around and came back down, pretty soon that would be an elimination. Or they jumped on here and then they went down, elimination again. Something of a grey area would be if your dog actually got thrown off. Should they be eliminated for getting thrown off? So say your dog was here, hadn't got to the contact, but it hadn't deliberately jumped off. The seesaw went down and the dog got not thrown off the side. Should they get a fault for that? That's a bit of a grey area. For your dog, it was impossible for them potentially to hold their position. Of course, that's a training area, because you've got to teach them how to make sure they can hold their contact. But at the same time, technically, they did not get to the contact area. So a bit of a grey area again with that one. And of course, in the heat of the moment, you can't always tell if a dog deliberately jumped off or they were thrown off. Can't always tell. But those are your main things to consider when competing. One of the things I would suggest when you're looking at a seesaw as a handler, either in a training environment or in a competition environment, is I would always spend the time to look at your line of entry onto the seesaw. Now, in a KC show, you would expect the judge would know that they should have a nice straight entry. What it can be is you can have a jump offset, so there's a slight curve, but as long as there's plenty of time for the dog to straighten up so they can power straight up the seesaw. But I have seen it in training environments, fun clubs and some of these places, and perhaps shows where the entry onto the seesaw is not a straight line. The dog is being asked to come on a turn straight up. No, that is not how the seesaw should be done and set up. It's not safe for the dog. It makes it difficult for the dog to negotiate the seesaw, and it just shouldn't be. So as a handler, it's your responsibility to just double check those lines. As I said, it would be unusual to find it in a kennel club show, but sometimes in smaller shows, and sometimes at, say, some of these have-a-go agility places and stuff like that, or fun agility, you do need to take a look. Yeah, it was nearly my foot, wasn't it? And just make sure the line is okay. As that's just your responsibility. And if it isn't, you either choose not to do the seesaw, or you can obviously raise an issue with the judge or say, look, I'm not sure about that line on the seesaw, but it all depends on your confidence level. Anyway, that is what you need to know about the seesaw in terms of handling and what can go wrong and how you need to overcome it. So I hope you've enjoyed this Everyday Canines video, and if you have, you might subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can check us out on Facebook and Instagram, and I hope to see you all again very, very soon.